Gary Russell Jr. criticized Floyd Mayweather and Shakur for what they're doing in the sport of boxing. Let's talk about it in this video. King Jr. got another video for y'all. So the longest reigning champion, Gary Russell Jr., criticized Shakur Stevenson, saying that Shakur ducked me. He didn't want to fight me at 126. And he also criticized that Floyd Mayweather has ruined the sport of boxing with exhibition matches and so on and so forth. Here's my take on the whole situation. I really don't talk about Gary Russell because Gary Russell, basically, in my opinion, he derailed his own career. You call out these guys and you never push for the action, you never press for the gas for the fight. We recently seen, shout out to BFTB Boxing. BFTB Boxing was recently trying to get this fight done between Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson, even though it was a term sheet. It was nothing major that BFTB was trying to get seriously involved in a contract, but he wanted to make sure that we can push forward and get this fight acclimated. And it's funny to me that Gary Russell doesn't want to fight Devin Haney. I believe Gary Russell is ducking Devin Haney because you didn't push for the fight. You talked all that mouth. You said you was going to fight Terrence Crawford after he talked trash and say he was going to snap your neck. You never pushed for the Terrence Crawford fight. You never pushed for the Gervonta Tank Davis fight. And it would have been a big fight if you fight Gervonta Tank Davis, the DMV and all this DMV versus whatever. I don't know too much about it. Y'all go do your research on it. But you and Gervonta Tank Davis, y'all represent y'all cities heavy, and it would be a mega fight. And Gary Russell Jr. My problem with Gary Russell Jr. is that he's not pushing for these fights. He only fights once a year. You're 33 years of age. And Father Time is going to wind up catching up with you as well. Yes, you're the longest reigning champion in the sport of boxing. Yes, he's highly skilled. Have one of the greatest punch placements in the sport of boxing to date. He has the best footwork. He's one of the top best featherweights. Gary Russell's just skilled all around. Great southpaw, great footwork, great punch placement. Power, respectable power. He's got all the tools. But my problem with Gary Russell Jr. is that he's not pushing for the fight. It's funny to me that they almost had got this deal done between him and Devin Haney. The situation, in my opinion, was the money problem. Gary Russell Jr. said, I want to do this, I want to do that. And Devin Haney basically offered Gary Russell everything but the kitchen sink. And Gary Russell demanded more money. I can understand that because you're a veteran of the sport. You deserve more money. And, guys, if you're at a lower rate class, you're not going to get paid the big dollars. And Gary Russell Jr., he only makes a guaranteed $1 million every, not every single fight, I believe, but maximum $1 million and stuff like that. But Gary Russell just didn't push for the Devin Haney fight. Devin Haney was going to offer him $2 million at the max, and Gary Russell was willing to take it. And there was something in the term sheet that Gary Russell didn't like and stuff. And the fight took a turn for the worse and never happened. And even Eddie Hearn said, "Why would you push for a guy at a lower rate class that doesn't have even a big name?" And Eddie Hearn is speaking 100% facts. Gary Russell Jr. derailed his own career, in my opinion. You got up-and-coming brothers. You got Gary Antonio Russell, who fights at 122. You got Gary Russell at 126. You got Gary Antoine Russell at 140. Junior welterweight. He's going to be a big guy. We seen him, how he built a name for himself. He fought Matt Santiago, the one Adrian Bona barely beat on a split decision, and he wound up knocking him out in the 6th round, I believe. And he also fought Jerron Boots Ennis in the amateurs and beat Jerron Boots Ennis. I don't know if he can do it in the pros, but that would be a very interesting fight. And Gary Antoine Russell, I hope he makes a name for himself. I hope he doesn't derail his career just like his brother Gary Russell Jr. But the point of the matter is, Gary Russell Jr., you can't blast Floyd Mayweather because of exhibition bouts. We've seen a lot of the great fighters host exhibition bouts. George Foreman, Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather. Who else hosts an exhibition bout? You know, you could even throw, I'm not going to say Jake Paul the greatest, but Jake Paul, by his name, his brand being so big, Logan Paul, his brand being so big, you know, these guys are making tons of money doing exhibitions. So I can't discredit them for trying to get the most money they can. But Gary Russell, you haven't did anything with your career. You fought at 126 your whole entire life. You know, the only loss you have against Lomachenko, you said you was dehydrated and so on and so forth. Well, to me, I don't know. Maybe you was. Who knows? Maybe you just wasn't prepared. In my opinion, I don't think Gary Russell was ready for Lomachenko, in my opinion. Because basically Gary Russell and Lomachenko have similar styles. The difference is Lomachenko is better than Gary Russell at the style that Gary Russell has. Gary Russell was young at the time, so I didn't know if Gary Russell was ready for that fight or whatever or not, but they wound up pushing him for the fight. But you can't discredit Floyd Mayweather and Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Davis. Shakur Stevenson is fighting Jamel Herring. He's trying to make a name for himself. He's trying to win a belt. You know, Shakur Stevenson, you can even look at his frame. He's a big guy. You know, he's probably going to go all the way up to, in my opinion, he's probably going to go all the way up to 147, you know. That's just my opinion, because his frame, you know, he's going to have a shorter reach, but his frame is going to allow him to go up all the way up to 147, you know. But you can't discredit Shakur because Shakur didn't duck you. Shakur just didn't want to fight at 126 because Shakur was getting big already and he couldn't acclimate to the weight. Gervonta Davis, you could have fought him earlier when he was at 126. You know, Gervonta Davis wound up getting big. He couldn't acclimate the weight anymore. And you could still push for these big fights. You can't just have a full glass of wine and not expect to get another full glass. You know, I mean, that's my scenario on the whole thing, you know. But Gary Russell Jr. basically just derailed his own career. You're not pushing for the big fights. You need to do something now. Your career is on the verge of stardom, you know. Not stardom, I meant verge of going downhill even more, because you calling everybody out, you saying they're ducking you and doing this, all this other stuff. I usually don't do videos on Gary Russell Jr. or Shakur or anything like that, but I have to recognize this one because Gary Russell Jr., you're doing all this talking, you're not pushing for the big fights. You're never going to get the big fights because you have a bad relationship with Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather will never let you fight Gervonta Davis. After you disrespected him, and you said Floyd Mayweather is shining you and your brothers out of the sport of boxing. No, you shine yourself out of the sport of boxing. That's you that want to be an enemy towards everybody and not want to push for the fight. You know, let's make it happen. You know, that's you. But I'm not going to keep this video long. Gary Russell Jr. criticized Floyd Mayweather and Shakur Stevenson, and Shakur ducked him, he claims, and Floyd Mayweather is failed at the sport of boxing. That's my take on the matter. Let me know what y'all think. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. This is your boy King Jr. I'm out of here. Peace.